The first thing I heard was the word that ruins families in the quietest way. Anxiety. Not shouted, not dramatic, just dropped into the room like a paperweight, as if naming it made everything lighter. The doctor said it with the tired kindness of someone who wanted to go home. Ethan Marlowe stood at the foot of the hospital bed, in a suit that probably cost more than my car, but he looked like any other father in that moment. Hands clasped too tight, jaw clenched like he was holding back weather. Noah lay on crisp white sheets, small shoulders rising and falling, his fingers worrying the edge of a sketchbook the nurses had given him. His twin, Lucas, perched on a chair, swinging his legs, eyes shiny and brave in that way children do when they're trying not to scare the adults. "It's been a hard year," the doctor continued, flipping through the chart without really seeing it. "He's sensitive. Changes in routine can present like this. We'll send you home with reassurance. Limit screens, keep lights soft, and try not to alarm him." Ethan's voice came out careful. He clutched his chest, he went grey, he said it hurt. Lucas lifted his chin and spoke with the kind of honesty that lands like a stone. Noah didn't feel scared. He felt wrong. The doctor smiled at Lucas like he just said something sweet instead of devastating. That's what anxiety feels like sometimes. I was standing near the door because that's where reporters stand when they're not sure if they've been invited into a tragedy or stumbled into it. My name is Carlos Vieira. I've spent years writing about billionaires and buildings and the bright promises money makes. But that night in the fluorescent hum of the private wing, I watched Ethan Marlowe's wealth fold into the same helpless shape as everyone else's. The doctor patted Ethan's shoulder, prescribed calm, and walked out. And then, as if the universe had waited for the door to close, Noah's breathing changed. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a slight hitch, a pause too long between inhale and exhale. Lucas noticed first. He stopped swinging his legs. His hands went still on his own knees. He reached for Noah with the kind of instinct that is older than language. "Dad," Lucas whispered, voice trembling. "Noah's different." Ethan leaned in, calling his son's name, and for a second there was only the soft squeak of hospital bedding and the far-off beep of a monitor down the hall. Noah's eyes fluttered, unfocused. His fingertips pressed into his sketchbook as if it were the only anchor he trusted. A nurse rushed in, then another. They spoke in professional tones, gentle but urgent. No sirens, no chaos, just swift movement, calm hands, the bed wheeling toward a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and lemon polish. Ethan followed, too tall for the space, too powerful for his own powerlessness. Lucas ran beside him, nearly tripping, and I followed because I had already learned something about the Marlowe family. Their grief didn't make noise, but it filled rooms. Now let me rewind, because this story didn't start in a hospital. It started in a house that felt like a museum for a woman who wasn't there. The Marlowe mansion sits behind iron gates and a curtain of old trees that makes the world outside feel far away. Inside, everything is polished and quiet. A marble foyer that echoes footsteps like a confession, a library that smells of leather and cedar, a sunroom filled with pale light and plants that never seem to die, a formal dining room that stays set as if waiting for guests who never arrive. The master suite, I was told, had been kept the same since Elena Marlowe passed, her perfume still in the dresser, her silk scarf still draped over the chair, a portrait of her above the fireplace, watching the house with an expression that could either be love or warning, depending on the day. And then there was the twins' wing, bright, warm, lived in, a playroom scattered with soft blocks and sensory toys, a bedroom with 2 beds and matching quilts, a little art studio where Noah's drawings were clipped to a line like prayer flags. The wing smelled faintly of crayons and warm milk and the lavender soap their mother used to buy. It was the only part of the mansion that breathed. Ethan Marlowe moved through the mansion like a man living underwater. Since Elena's death, he ran on routines. Coffee at 5:30, staring out at the garden where Elena's white roses grew. Meetings at 7, voice steady, eyes hollow. A therapist once a week for the boys, delivered by the best specialists money could hire. And every night, after the twins slept, Ethan sat in the library with Elena's last letter in his hand, never opening it because he was afraid of what it might ask him to face. The new maid arrived 3 weeks before Noah's first episode. Her name was Marisa Duarte. She was not a maid in the way rich people sometimes imagine. Silent, invisible, grateful, Marisa carried a quiet gravity, like someone who had learned to hold other people's crises without dropping her own. She was in her early 30s, hair always pinned neatly, hands always busy. When she spoke, she did it with respect, but her eyes didn't lower the way some staff members' eyes did. They watched. They noticed. Marisa had taken the job because her mother, Donna Celia, needed medication and stability after a string of hospital bills that left their kitchen table covered in envelopes. Marisa had a teenage brother who was brilliant and angry, and a landlord who didn't care about either. She needed steady work, she needed health insurance, she needed time. On her first day, Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "The house manager will show you what to do," he said, voice flat, as if speaking was a chore. But the twins did look up. Lucas ran straight to her like a sunbeam. "You smell like soap," he announced, delighted. "Good soap." Noah didn't run. He studied. His gaze moved from her shoes to her hands to her eyes. Then he lifted his sketchbook and slowly turned it around. A drawing. 2 stick boys holding hands under a big house, and a woman in the sky drawn with a halo of flowers. Noah tapped the woman, then tapped his chest, then tapped Marissa's. A question in gestures. Marissa knelt. The marble floor was cold under her knees, but she stayed there anyway. "I'm Marissa," she said softly, "and I'm here. I don't know the rules yet, but I know how to listen." Noah's face softened in a way so subtle most people miss it. Lucas clapped, as if a game had begun. And in that moment, in the quiet of a mansion built to impress the world, something real flickered to life. The first time Noah had symptoms, it was after dinner. The dining room was too big for 4 people, and the silence at the table felt like another place setting. Ethan tried to talk about school, tried to ask about drawings, tried not to sound like a man reading from a script titled "How to Be Here." Lucas answered with stories that made no sense but carried joy. Noah ate slowly, eyes distant, then suddenly pressed his palm against his chest and made a small sound. Half breath, half protest. Ethan's chair scraped back so hard it startled the silverware. "Noah!" Noah's brows pulled together. He didn't scream. He didn't fall. He just looked confused, like his own body had changed the rules. Lucas slid off his chair and pressed his small hand to Noah's shoulder. Marisa, carrying plates, froze. She watched Noah's face, the faint sheen of sweat, the way his fingers trembled. "Sir," she said carefully, "this doesn't look like a tantrum." Ethan's voice cracked on the word he hated. Hospital. That's how they ended up with the same doctor who would later say anxiety like a blanket. The hospital was pristine, private, expensive, attached to the best insurance money could buy. The staff spoke politely, moved efficiently, offered bottled water. The doctor ordered tests, took notes, promised answers. And then something shifted. On the second visit, the doctor's tone changed. He talked less about tests and more about stress. He glanced at Ethan like a man measuring how much trouble a father might cause. He suggested behavioral strategies. He reassured. He minimized. He did not, Marissa noticed, show them the screen when a technician wheeled the machine away. Noah came home quieter. Lucas came home angry. Ethan came home with his fists clenched so tight the veins in his hands looked like cords. That night, while the mansion slept, Marissa walked past the twins' art studio and saw Noah's newest drawing clipped to the line. It was the mansion again, but now the windows were dark. Above it, a scribble of storm clouds, and in one corner, drawn small, a rectangle with numbers, like a monitor. Noah had drawn his fear as data. Marissa's chest tightened. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and held it with both hands, the way you hold something fragile. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Donna Celia praying over a pot of beans when Marisa was a little girl. God doesn't always remove the storm, Minafilia. Sometimes he shows you where the door is. The next day, in the hospital lobby, Marissa watched the doctor greet the hospital administrator like an old friend, a handshake that lingered, a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Then the administrator noticed Ethan, and his smile changed, wider, more corporate. He said something about how the Marlowe family was important to our institution. He spoke the word institution like it mattered more than boy. That was the first time Marissa felt the villain in the room wasn't a person. It was a system, polished floors, coded language, incentives that lived in spreadsheets. And on the third visit, After Noah's episode worsened and the doctor again said anxiety, something happened that should never happen in a hospital built on promises. The exam results were suddenly unavailable. "We can't locate the file," a nurse said, blinking at the computer. "It must not have uploaded correctly." Ethan stared. "You're telling me my son went through all that, and now you lost it?" The nurse's smile was thin. "We'll repeat the test if necessary." Marisa looked past the nurse to the printer station near the nurse's desk. A stack of papers sat there unattended, the top sheet showing bold letters that made her stomach drop. Diagnostic summary. The paper slid slightly in the air-conditioning breeze, like it wanted to be noticed. Marisa didn't grab it, not yet. Not with cameras above and staff watching, but she memorized the header, the date, the patient initials, and she felt something else too, that the missing file wasn't an accident. It was a decision. That night, back in the hospital room, after the doctor's dismissal and Noah's sudden decline, the corridor swallowed them again. Ethan paced outside the nurse's station like a caged lion. Lucas pressed his forehead against the wall, whispering Noah's name like a spell. Marisa stood still, heart pounding, eyes scanning the printer station. A new sheet slid into the tray with a soft whir. Marisa saw the words before anyone else did. And just like that, the missing exam tried to come back. But when Marisa stepped closer, the tray was suddenly empty, snatched away by hands that moved too quickly to be innocent. I watched Marissa's face as she realized the truth at the exact same time I did. Someone wasn't losing Noah's exam, someone was erasing it. And the question that hung in the sterile air, heavier than any monitor beep, was this: who benefits when a child's truth disappears? Marisa didn't chase the paper. She followed the hands that took it. The morning after Noah's scare, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. The garden outside the breakfast room glistened with dew, and Elena's white roses bowed under the weight of it, as if even the flowers were tired. Ethan stood at the kitchen island, staring at a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. His eyes were red, in a way money can't hide. Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, pressing a toy ambulance back and forth with furious focus. Noah sat at the table, sketchbook open, drawing circles inside circles, tight spirals that looked like storms. Marisa moved quietly between them, setting down toast no one touched, wiping a counter that was already clean. Her mind replayed the printer station, the paper sliding out, the hands snatching it like contraband. She had seen enough in her life to know the difference between confusion and cover-up. Ethan finally spoke, voice low. "They said the system glitched. They said it happens." He looked at Marisa like he was talking to the only adult left in the room. "Do you believe that?" Marisa chose her words carefully. "Sir, I believe people can make a system glitch when they need it to." Lucas looked up fast. "Like when my tablet breaks but Dad hides it?" Ethan almost smiled. It lasted half a second. Then it died. "Exactly like that, buddy." Noah drew another spiral, then pressed his palm flat on the page as if trying to calm it. He lifted his eyes to Marisa and made 3 gentle taps on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Then he pointed to her heart and then to his. Marisa felt tears threaten, sudden and sharp. She leaned down so her voice wouldn't spill into the room like panic. 3 taps means I'm here, okay? That can be ours. When it feels scary, you do 3 taps, I'll do 3 taps back. Noah nodded once, solemn. Lucas immediately joined in, tapping too loud, grinning. Our secret code. And just like that, the secret bond formed. Not dramatic, not mystical, just 3 taps and a promise to stay present. That afternoon, Ethan took Noah back to the hospital for observation. He insisted on staying. He insisted on answers. The staff treated him with the careful politeness reserved for powerful donors. They offered him a private waiting room with leather chairs and a fruit tray. They did not offer him truth. Marisa went too as a support, officially household staff, unofficially the only person in that building who wasn't intimidated by titles. In the lobby, she watched the hospital administrator, Mr. Caldwell, sweep past the reception desk in a tailored suit, speaking into a headset like his voice controlled elevators. He glanced at Ethan, then smiled too broadly. "Mr. Marlowe," Caldwell said, extending his hand. "We are taking excellent care of your son." Ethan didn't shake. "I want to see the exam report." Caldwell's smile stayed in place. "Our team is reviewing everything. You understand how these things are? I understand my son is not a spreadsheet," Ethan snapped. and for the first time I heard anger crack through his grief. Caldwell's eyes flicked to Marissa, then away, as if she were furniture that suddenly moved. "Mr. Marlowe, please, stress is contagious in children. Let us handle this." That line, "let us handle this," was the system talking. It was what institutions say when they want control more than resolution. Later, while Ethan sat with Noah and Lucas in the pediatric observation room, Marissa stepped into the hallway to get water. She walked past the nurse's station and saw the printer again. Her pulse picked up. The air smelled like hand sanitizer and warm plastic. A nurse laughed softly at something on her phone. 2 interns rushed by with clipboards. Everything looked normal, which is exactly what makes wrongdoing so easy. Marissa lingered near a bulletin board covered in hospital policy posters. She pretended to read one while watching the printer tray out of the corner of her eye. She saw a staff member she didn't recognize, a man in an IT badge, approach the printer, pull out a sheet, glance at it, and slide it into a folder marked Utilization Review. Utilization Review. Words that sound harmless until you realize they can decide whether a child gets help. Marissa waited until the man walked away, then moved closer. She didn't touch anything. She simply watched the printer's display and saw the last job name still glowing faintly. Noah M. Summary. Her stomach tightened. She backed away and walked straight to the hallway that led toward records, a corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. She stopped at the threshold because she wasn't reckless. She was deliberate. She knew you don't fight a system by throwing your body at it. You fight it by finding the crack where truth leaks out. She returned to the room where Ethan sat with the boys. Lucas was trying to make Noah laugh by balancing a sticker on his own nose. Noah smiled faintly, then tapped 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Marissa tapped back on the doorframe. Tap, tap, tap. Lucas watched and giggled like it was magic. Ethan's voice dropped. "Marissa, what are you thinking?" Marissa sat down across from him, careful not to startle the boys. "I'm thinking the report exists," she said. "And I'm thinking someone doesn't want you to see it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Why?" Marissa swallowed. "Because if the report suggests something that costs money, more tests, specialists, long-term monitoring, then the hospital has to justify it to the insurance. And insurance, sometimes they prefer anxiety because it's cheaper." Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough to ache just watching it. "I pay for the best plan." Marissa's eyes held his. "Sometimes the best plan still has rules you don't see until you're begging." That word, begging, hit the room like thunder. Ethan flinched as if he'd been slapped by the idea. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Marlowe, we're going to discharge Noah. His vitals are stable and the doctor believes..." Ethan stood. "No." The nurse blinked. "Sir?" Ethan's voice rose, controlled but fierce. "You told me you lost the exam. Then you told me it's anxiety. Then my son deteriorated the same night you dismissed us. I'm not leaving until I see the report." The nurse glanced toward the hallway, nervous. I'll get the doctor." As soon as she left, Lucas scooted close to Ethan and whispered with fierce loyalty. "Dad, don't let them say it's in his head. Noah's head is smart. His body is talking." Noah, hearing his name, looked up. He didn't speak much, but he reached over and placed his small hand on Ethan's wrist. It was light, but it anchored Ethan like a weight tied to the earth. Marissa felt her own past rise up, an old flashback that smelled like cheap hospital soap. She remembered being 19, sitting beside Donna Celia in a crowded public clinic, watching a doctor wave away her mother's pain with a shrug and a prescription that didn't help. She remembered the way staff talked louder instead of kinder when you looked poor. She remembered thinking, this is how people disappear. Not in a crash, not in a headline, but in paperwork. Marissa blinked the memory away and focused on the present. She stood. "I'm going to the cafeteria," she said loudly enough for anyone listening to hear something normal. "Do you want water?" Ethan nodded, distracted, eyes burning. Marissa walked out, heart pounding, and didn't go to the cafeteria. She went toward the records corridor again, this time watching for cameras, timing her steps with the flow of staff. A janitor rolled a cart past the authorized personnel sign, and Marissa followed at a respectful distance, blending into the background the way women like her learn to do when survival depends on invisibility. The corridor opened into a copy room with a large printer and stacks of folders. A sign on the wall read, "Confidential." A second sign read, "No USB devices." That second sign made Marissa's pulse spike. On a desk beside the printer sat a small tray filled with stray pens, sticky notes, and a single black pen drive, unlabeled, ordinary, forgotten, or left on purpose. Marissa's breath caught. She didn't touch it immediately. She looked around. The room smelled of toner and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like an insect. No one was there. She thought of Noah's spirals. She thought of Lucas's whisper. She thought of Elena's roses, drooping with dew as if the house itself was mourning. And she thought of her mother's voice. "Find the door." Marissa moved closer and noticed a sticky note under the pen drive with 2 words scribbled fast. "Delete after." Her skin went cold. She didn't pocket the pen drive. Not yet. She took out her phone and snapped a photo of the note and the desk, framing it wide enough to show where it sat. Evidence without theft. Proof without fingerprints. Then footsteps sounded in the hall. Marissa's heart lurched. She stepped back, hands visible, and picked up a random stack of paper as if she belonged there. An IT staff member walked in, the same man she'd seen earlier. He froze when he saw her. "Can I help you?" His voice was sharp. Marissa smiled politely, the way working-class women smile when danger wears a badge. "I'm looking for the discharge packet," she lied smoothly. "The nurse said it might be in copying." The man's eyes flicked to the desk. His body shifted, subtle, protective. "It's not here." Marissa nodded as if embarrassed. "Sorry, wrong room." She walked out, calm on the outside, shaking on the inside. She hadn't gotten the pen drive, but she had seen it. And now she knew the exam wasn't just missing. It was being handled like something toxic. Back in the observation room, Ethan was arguing quietly with the doctor. The doctor's voice stayed mild, condescending. "Mr. Marlowe, you're catastrophizing. Children pick up on parental anxiety." Ethan slammed his palm against the counter. The sound made Lucas jump. Noah pressed his fingers to his ears for a second, then did 3 taps on the bed rail. Tap, tap, tap. Marissa answered with 3 taps on the doorframe. Tap, tap, tap. The doctor blinked at the exchange, irritated by a language he couldn't control. Marissa stepped forward and said softly but clearly, "Doctor, if the exam is missing, why did I just see Noah M's summary on the printer queue?" The room went silent. The doctor's face tightened. "Excuse me?" Marissa met his eyes. "And why is there a pen drive in the records copy room with a note that says, 'Delete after'?" Ethan turned slowly toward her, stunned. "What?" The doctor's composure cracked. "This is inappropriate. Staff areas are restricted." Marissa didn't back down. "So is erasing a child's medical record." Ethan's breathing became louder, almost a growl. "Caldwell," he said, voice like ice. "Get me Caldwell. Now." And somewhere in the hospital's hidden machinery, I felt the gears shift. Because the system had been comfortable until that moment, it had assumed Ethan Marlowe would accept the word anxiety and go home. It had assumed Marissa Duarte would stay quiet. The system was wrong. The pen drive wasn't just sitting there, it was bait, and Marissa had just shown them she knew it. Caldwell arrived with the polished calm of a man trained to soothe donors and silence problems. He walked into the observation room like he owned the air. His suit was perfect. His smile was practiced. His eyes were tired in a way that suggested he had done this before. "Mr. Marlowe," he said, hands open in a gesture of peace. "Let's talk privately." Ethan didn't move. "You said you take excellent care of my son." "We do," Caldwell replied smoothly. "Then why is Noah's exam missing?" Ethan demanded. "Why did my staff member find evidence of deletion instructions in your records room?" Caldwell's gaze flicked to Marissa, and something in it hardened for a split second. Annoyance that someone below had stepped into a place reserved for above. Then he softened his face again. "With all due respect, household staff can misunderstand clinical processes." Marissa's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "A sticky note that says 'delete after' isn't a clinical process." Caldwell chuckled as if she were naive. "It could refer to temporary files, internal routing." Ethan stepped closer until Caldwell had to tilt his head up. "Stop talking to me like I'm stupid. I built an empire from nothing. I know what a cover-up looks like." Lucas suddenly stood and placed himself between Ethan and Caldwell in a tiny act of protection. "Don't make my dad small," he said, voice shaking but brave, "and don't make Noah's pain small." The room went still again. Even Caldwell didn't have a script for that. The doctor cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Mr. Marlowe, this is escalating. Noah is stable. The best thing for him is calm at home. Noah, as if responding to the word calm, drew a shaky line across his spiral. He pressed his pen so hard it nearly tore the page. Then he looked up at Marissa and tapped 3 times, faster now. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't just "I'm here," it was "help." Marissa's heart squeezed. She thought of her mother, of the times she had been told to be grateful for scraps. She thought of Ethan, trapped in a different kind of cage, one made of pride and grief. She thought of Elena's portrait, watching. "Mr. Caldwell," Marissa said quietly, "if you have nothing to hide, show the exam report. Right now." Caldwell's smile thinned. "That's not how medical systems work. There are protocols." Ethan's voice broke on the word he hated most. "Please." It was barely audible, but it was there. A billionaire saying please to a hospital administrator. Caldwell's eyes softened, not with compassion but with advantage. "Mr. Marlowe, I think you need rest. We can schedule a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. In the meantime," Ethan's hands trembled. 2 weeks? My son worsened in 1 night. Caldwell spread his hands. "We can't conjure results that aren't in the system." Marissa realized then that this was not going to be solved with arguments alone. The system would outlast anger. It would outweigh grief. It would hide behind protocol until the family gave up. She knew what that waiting did to people. It turned pain into resignation. That evening, Ethan brought the boys home because he didn't know what else to do without physically grabbing the hospital by its collar. The mansion lights were warm, but Ethan's face stayed shadowed. Lucas refused to take off his shoes. He sat on the stairs in the foyer like a guard dog. Noah went straight to the art studio and drew something new. A small figure standing in front of a large rectangle labeled hospital, holding a tiny rectangle labeled truth. The figure was colored in deep blue. Marissa recognized it. Noah was drawing her. Later, when the twins were asleep, Ethan sat in the library with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink, staring at Elena's portrait. I was there too, because Ethan had invited me weeks earlier to write a piece about his foundation in Elena's name. I had planned to write about philanthropy. Instead, I was watching a man unravel. Ethan spoke without looking at me. "They don't treat me like a father," he said. "They treat me like an account." Marissa stood by the fireplace, hands clasped. "That's what systems do," she said. "They reduce people to numbers because numbers don't cry." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Numbers don't die either." He finally looked at Marissa, and his eyes were raw. "What did you see? Tell me exactly." Marissa told him about the printer queue, the pen drive, the note. She told him about the IT man, about the restricted corridor. She admitted she had taken a photo, but not the device. Ethan's face tightened with frustration and gratitude at the same time. "Why didn't you take it?" he demanded, then softened. "Sorry, you did what you could." Marissa swallowed. "I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to risk being accused." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "I can buy the hospital," he muttered. "I can buy the insurer. I can buy the world. But I can't buy them telling the truth about my son." Silence fell, thick and heavy. Outside, wind moved through the trees like a low warning. Inside, Eleanor's portrait watched. Marissa's phone buzzed. A text from her brother, "Rent due." Another from her mother, "Are you okay, minha filha? I prayed for you tonight." Marissa closed her eyes and felt her faith rise not as a sermon, but as a rope. She had learned long ago that prayer wasn't a way to avoid action. It was a way to survive it. In her mind, she heard Donna Celia again. "God shows you where the door is, but you still have to walk through." Marissa opened her eyes. "Sir," she said to Ethan, voice steady now. "If they're deleting the file, it might still exist somewhere. Systems leave traces. Printers store logs. Computers cache documents. Someone put that pen drive there for a reason." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "You think it was bait?" "I do," Marissa said. "They wanted someone to take it, so they could blame the missing exam on theft." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then how do we get the truth without giving them a scapegoat?" Marissa hesitated, then said the thing that scared her most. "We go back. Carefully, we document everything. We get the report without stealing. We force them to reveal it." Ethan stared at her like she'd just offered to walk into a fire. "Marissa," she held his gaze, "I'm not asking you to risk the boys. They stay home, safe. I'm asking you to trust me." Ethan's pride battled with his desperation. Money had always been his weapon, Trust was unfamiliar territory, but he had nothing else. He nodded once, slow. Okay. That night, Marissa stood in the twins' wing and watched Noah sleep. His face was soft in rest, the lines of worry erased. Lucas slept sprawled across his bed like he had surrendered to childhood for a moment. Marissa felt a surge of protectiveness, so fierce it almost hurt. Noah stirred, eyes half opening as if he sensed her presence. He didn't speak, but his fingers moved in the air. Tap, tap, tap. Marissa tapped back gently on the bed frame. Tap, tap, tap. I'm here, she whispered. And I'm not leaving you alone in this. Downstairs, Ethan sat alone in the library and finally did something he hadn't done in months. He opened Elena's last letter. I didn't see the words, but I saw what it did to him. His face changed, the way a landscape changes when lightning strikes. His hand shook. His lips parted as if he wanted to call her name, but the sound didn't come. He looked up at Marissa when she returned and held the letter out like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She knew, Ethan whispered. Marissa stepped closer. Ethan's voice broke. Elena wrote that if anything ever happened with the boy's care, I should never accept the first answer. She wrote the name of the hospital. She wrote, they will call it anxiety when it's actually cost. Marissa's stomach dropped. Why would she know that? Ethan's eyes were wet. Because she fought them when she was sick. He swallowed hard. I thought I was protecting her by letting doctors handle it. I thought money meant safety. Marissa felt tears burn. The villain wasn't just the hospital. It was the illusion that institutions protect you if you pay enough. Ethan gripped the letter. We go tomorrow, he said, voice low and deadly. And this time I don't leave until truth has a face. Marissa nodded, then whispered a prayer under her breath, not for miracles, but for courage. The next day, Ethan went to the hospital with a lawyer and a security consultant. The hospital responded with polite resistance. Closed doors, delayed meetings, statements about privacy and procedure. Caldwell insisted the report was unavailable. The doctor insisted Noah was stable. The insurer sent a representative who spoke in calm phrases about medical necessity. And while the men in suits played chess with paperwork, Marissa watched the staff. She watched the IT man. She watched the copy room door. She watched the system try to outweight them. Then in a hallway near imaging, a nurse she had seen before, young, exhausted human, caught Marissa's eye and hesitated. The nurse's gaze flicked toward a small side door marked Staff Only, then back to Marissa. It was a tiny movement, almost nothing, but Marissa understood it the way you understand a whispered plea. The nurse passed by and let something fall from her pocket on purpose, a folded slip of paper. Marissa waited, then picked it up as if it were trash. On it, handwritten in hurried pen, were 4 words. Printer logs. Basement. 3 a.m. Marissa's heart thudded so hard she felt it in her throat. The system had cracks. Someone inside was leaving doors. She looked up and saw the IT man watching from the end of the hall. His eyes were cold. He knew she had the note, and now he knew she was going to walk straight toward the truth. The hospital wasn't just hiding Noah's report. Now it was watching Marissa, like she was the threat. At 2:47 a.m., the mansion was quiet except for the soft tick of a clock in the hallway, an elegant, old-fashioned sound that made the silence feel alive. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, fully dressed, like a man waiting for a storm. Marissa stood in the doorway, coat in hand, shoes already on. The boys are with the night nurse, Ethan whispered. Marissa nodded. And the security team? Outside, Ethan said, voice tight. But you were right. If we show up with an army, they'll lock everything down. Caldwell will call it harassment. They'll turn us into the problem. Marissa swallowed. Then we go quietly. We document. We leave with proof. Ethan stared at her, and I could see the war inside him. This was a man used to controlling outcomes with money and force. Tonight he was choosing something harder, restraint. I went too, because by then this story was no longer about a billionaire's suffering. It was about how a system tries to silence a child's truth, and how unlikely courage can pry it open. The hospital at night is a different world. The lobby lights are dimmer. The halls echo. The air smells colder, more metallic. A few patients wander slowly with IV poles like ghosts tethered to machines. Staff move quietly, voices hushed, shoes squeaking on polished floors. Everything feels suspended, as if time itself is waiting. Marissa wore a visitor badge. Ethan wore invisibility that only grief can give. People glance at a tired father and look away. We move toward the service elevators, following the nurse's note. Basement, printer logs. A security guard near the elevators glanced up. Ethan's name was famous enough to make people nervous, but at 3 a.m. even fame feels muted. The guard nodded politely and didn't ask questions. Institutions are strange that way. They question the powerless and assume the powerful are allowed. The elevator ride down was quiet except for the hum of cables. Marissa clasped her hands and whispered something under her breath. I caught the end of it. Lord, guide my feet. Ethan heard too. He didn't mock it. He didn't roll his eyes. He simply stood close, as if her faith made the air less frightening. The basement corridor was narrower, painted a dull beige that made everything feel older. The smell changed. More dust, more paper, more cold plastic. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly. A sign on a door read Records Archive. Another read Print Services. Marissa's pulse raced. She slowed her breathing the way Donna Celia had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like you're blowing out a candle without letting the smoke rise. The door to Print Services was locked. Marissa expected that. She took out her phone and turned on the camera. Not to record a dramatic video, but to capture time, location, evidence. Ethan's lawyer had already told them, document without breaking laws. Truth holds better when it's clean. Footsteps echoed behind us. Marissa froze. Ethan turned sharply, shoulders tense. A man appeared at the end of the corridor, the IT staff member. He wore a badge and an expression like a warning. You're not supposed to be down here, he said, voice flat. Ethan stepped forward. My son's record is missing. I'm allowed to request transparency. The IT man didn't look at Ethan the way most people did. He didn't look impressed, he looked annoyed. Requests go through administration, he said. This area is restricted. Marissa's voice stayed calm. We're not touching anything. We're waiting for authorized staff. The man's gaze slid to her phone. Stop recording. Marissa lifted her chin. I'm documenting where we are and what you're saying. The IT man's eyes narrowed. Your staff, he said, recognizing her. Household staff. You're not a patient representative. Marissa's cheeks flushed. I'm a witness. The man took a step closer, and suddenly the air felt thinner. Not because he was going to hurt anyone. This wasn't that kind of story, but because he carried the power of the system. The ability to accuse, to frame, to turn truth-seeking into wrongdoing. We have protocols, he said, voice low. And you're crossing a line. Ethan's voice cracked with restrained rage. My son nearly collapsed after your doctor dismissed him. The IT man shrugged slightly. Doctors make assessments. Marissa felt a flashback hit her, standing in that old clinic years ago, while a doctor waved away her mother's pain. The same shrug, the same dismissal, the same belief that people without power should accept suffering quietly. Marissa blinked, then did the 3 taps on her own thigh. Tap, 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 grounding herself. She remembered Noah's tiny fingers. She remembered Lucas's fierce eyes. She remembered Elena's letter in Ethan's hand. I'm not leaving, Marissa said. The IT man's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key card. He swiped the door to Print Services open with a deliberate motion, like he was showing them he controlled the doorway. Fine, he said. Come in. Let's end this. Ethan hesitated. Marissa's instincts screamed that this was a trap. But if they backed away, the system would win by fear. And if they stepped in, they could still win by clarity. Marissa entered first, phone recording the room, narrating quietly. Print Services, basement level. Time, 3:06 a.m. Inside, the room was filled with industrial printers, stacked paper, and a computer terminal with a login screen. A large binder labeled Print Logs sat on a shelf. Another binder labeled Deletion Requests sat beside it. Marissa's throat went dry. Ethan leaned forward. What is that? The IT man's voice stayed casual. Routine. Marissa approached the shelf slowly, careful not to touch. She zoomed her phone camera in, capturing the binder labels. Evidence of a process. Evidence that missing could be procedure. Then the IT man moved toward the computer terminal and typed quickly. See? He said, gesturing at the screen. No file, nothing to show, you're wasting time. Marissa watched his hands. The speed. The familiarity. She realized he wasn't proving absence. He was performing it. Her gaze dropped to the desk, and there it was. Almost exactly where she'd seen it before, the black pen drive. Same unlabeled look, same ordinary shape. This time, it lay beside a printed sheet, turned face down. Marissa's breath hitched. She didn't pick up the pen drive. She didn't need to. She pointed her phone camera at it and zoomed in enough to capture the tiny marking on its side, a hospital asset tag number. Ethan saw it too. "That's yours," he said slowly. "Hospital property." The IT man's eyes flicked, a fraction too fast. "It's irrelevant." Marissa reached for the printed sheet, not touching, just flipping it with the edge of a clean paper from the tray so she wouldn't leave fingerprints. The text came into view. Diagnostic summary, abnormal finding, requires follow-up. Marissa's heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. Ethan leaned in, eyes scanning the lines. I watched his face change from confusion to fury, to something like grief reborn. "It's not anxiety," Ethan whispered. Lucas's voice echoed in my head. "Noah's body is talking." Marissa kept filming. She narrated softly, "Printed diagnostic summary present in print services at 3:08 a.m. Abnormal finding. Follow-up recommended." The IT man's composure cracked. "Stop recording," he snapped, stepping toward her. Ethan stepped between them. "Don't touch her." The IT man paused, then reached for the paper with a swift motion. Ethan grabbed it first. Not yanking, not fighting, just holding it out of reach. The paper fluttered. In the struggle for control, Ethan's elbow bumped the paper stack on the edge of the desk. A tall ream shifted, sliding toward the floor. Marissa reacted instinctively, catching it before it fell. The motion was quick, clumsy, human. The paper stack was heavy. Her foot slipped slightly on the polished tile, and she hit her shoulder against the desk corner. No blood, no drama, just a sharp gasp and a wince that showed pain was real. Ethan's eyes widened. "Marissa, I'm okay," she said through clenched teeth, refusing to become the distraction. The IT man took advantage of the moment and lunged for the binder labeled "Deletion Requests," trying to shove it into a drawer. Marissa's camera caught the movement. Ethan, shaking with rage, grabbed the binder and held it up. "This is evidence," Ethan said, voice trembling. "You've been deleting records." The IT man's face went pale. "You don't understand." Footsteps pounded outside the room. A security officer arrived, then another. Caldwell's voice floated in the corridor before he appeared, furious and controlled. "What is going on?" Ethan turned, holding the diagnostic summary and the binder like weapons made of paper. "This," he said, voice loud now, "is what's going on." Caldwell's eyes flicked over the documents, and for a split second his face betrayed him. Fear. "This is a misunderstanding," Caldwell said quickly. "Mr. Marlowe, you're trespassing in restricted—" "I'm protecting my son," Ethan roared, and the sound shook the room. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A message from the night nurse at the mansion. Lucas woke up crying. "Noah is awake too. They're asking for Marissa." Marissa's breath caught. She hated being away from them, even for a night. But she reminded herself, the boys were safe. The nurse was there. No danger, just fear and longing. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, the nurse sent another message. Noah spoke. He said one word. "Marissa." Marissa froze. Tears burned her eyes. Noah rarely used spoken words, but tonight, in the confusion, he had reached for her name, like a lifeline. Lucas, in the background of the voice note that followed, cried, "Don't let them take the truth away. Noah needs the truth." Caldwell's face tightened when Ethan played the audio out loud, because the sound of a child naming truth is something no policy can erase. Caldwell tried again, voice cold. "We will handle this internally." Ethan's voice dropped to something deadly calm. "No, you won't." Marissa held her phone steady, capturing everything. The papers, the binder, Caldwell's expression, the IT man's panic. Proof. Clean, clear proof. And when security moved in and reached for Marissa's phone, Lucas's voice on the audio was still crying, still pleading, still refusing to be minimized. The system had tried to make Noah's truth disappear, but now the truth had witnesses, timestamps, and a child's voice behind it. Caldwell didn't look angry anymore. He looked trapped, and trapped systems always strike back. They escorted us to a small security office that smelled like stale coffee and rubber flooring. A camera in the corner blinked red. Caldwell stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight. The IT man sat in a chair, pale, staring at the floor. A hospital attorney arrived, speaking in measured tones about process and liability. It was amazing how quickly the system could assemble shields once the truth stepped into the light. Ethan sat rigid in a plastic chair, still gripping the diagnostic summary as if letting go would make it vanish again. Marissa sat beside him, shoulder aching, phone held close to her chest like a fragile heart. Caldwell's voice was tight. "Mr. Marlowe, this situation has escalated beyond reason. You entered restricted areas. You recorded confidential spaces." Marissa kept her voice steady. "We recorded what we saw without accessing patient data beyond Noah's own report." The attorney raised a hand. "Ma'am, your employment status—" Ethan snapped. "Don't you dare talk down to her." His voice shook with rage and something else, shame, because he knew deep down that the system assumed Marissa was disposable, and for too long his world had treated people like Marissa as background. Caldwell leaned forward. "The report you found is preliminary. It was not meant for distribution. It could be misinterpreted. Panic helps no one." Ethan laughed once, harsh. "Panic didn't put abnormal finding on my son's exam." The hospital attorney's tone softened. "We can schedule a meeting with the chief of pediatrics. We can review." Quietly, quietly, always quietly. Systems love quiet. Quiet keeps them in power. Marissa spoke, her voice low but clear. "No, you don't get quiet after you tried to erase. You don't get quiet after you dismissed a child's symptoms as anxiety to save costs." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "That's an accusation." Marissa lifted her phone slightly. "It's a documented timeline." Silence stretched. The blinking red camera seemed louder. Then Ethan did something I never expected from a man like him. His shoulders sagged, and his face, usually carved from control, collapsed into raw humanity. He turned toward Marissa, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I brought you into this. I risked your job, your safety. I used you because I didn't know how to fight them without someone brave." Marissa blinked, stunned. "Sir." Ethan's breath hitched. He stood, and in that cramped security office, under the blinking red eye of the camera, Ethan Marlowe lowered himself to the floor. He knelt, a billionaire in an expensive suit, on his knees on rubber flooring, looking up at the maid who had become the guardian of his son's truth. "Please," he whispered, "please don't let them take this away. I can't lose another part of my family, because I trusted the wrong people. Tell me what to do. I'll do it." The room went frozen. Even Caldwell looked shaken, not by the gesture itself, but by the power shift it represented. Ethan's money wasn't the dominant force anymore. Marissa's integrity was. Marissa's eyes filled. She didn't want him on the floor. She didn't want anyone begging. She reached down and took his hand gently. "Stand up," she said softly. "Not because you're above me, because Noah needs you steady." Ethan rose slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand, humiliated and relieved all at once. Marissa turned to Caldwell. "We leave with copies of Noah's full record," she said. "We file a formal complaint. We involve oversight, and you don't get to internally bury this." Caldwell's jaw worked. "Oversight will take months." Ethan's voice was steel now. "Then we make it days." What happened next wasn't a cinematic courtroom explosion. It was something more realistic, and in its own way more terrifying for the institution. Ethan used his resources not to silence, but to expose. He contacted the hospital board. He demanded an independent audit. He brought in a patient rights advocate. He hired a medical records compliance expert. He did everything by the book because the book was the only language the system pretended to respect. Within 48 hours, the hospital released Noah's complete diagnostic summary and the associated logs, confirming that the report had been generated, printed, routed to utilization review, and then flagged for deletion. The insurer's representative tried to claim it was an internal administrative error. The audit proved it wasn't isolated. Other cases had similar patterns. Expensive follow-ups softened into anxiety, stress, behavioral. Not because doctors were always cruel, but because incentives had been built like traps. The IT man eventually spoke, not out of redemption, but out of self-preservation. He admitted Caldwell's office pressured staff to manage outcomes that triggered high-cost coverage. The doctor, cornered, admitted he had been advised to avoid language that would complicate authorization. He said it as if that made it less vile. The institution tried to spread blame like fog, but fog clears when enough light is aimed at it. Noah received appropriate follow-up care, careful, responsible, grounded. No miraculous cures, no unrealistic promises, just a team that listened, monitored, adjusted, and treated his symptoms with the seriousness they deserved. Ethan didn't brag about it. He didn't buy a headline. He sat in waiting rooms like every other parent, learning the hard truth that love is not the same thing as control. Lucas stayed Lucas, expressive, affectionate, fiercely honest. He made friends with a therapy dog in the clinic and declared loudly that the dog was better than the doctor who said anxiety. The staff laughed, then looked thoughtful. Noah stayed Noah, quiet, observant, feeling deeply. He drew less spirals. He drew more doors. He drew Marissa as a blue figure, standing beside two smaller figures, and a larger one labeled Dad, all holding a long ribbon that stretched toward a bright square labeled Truth. Ethan kept Elena's letter in his pocket now. He didn't hide it in a drawer. He carried it like a compass. And Marissa? Ethan didn't let her mother's medicine bills drown her anymore. He didn't do it like charity. He did it like justice. He secured better coverage for Donna Celia, helped Marissa's brother enroll in a program that matched his talent, and raised Marissa's salary with a contract that made her stability non-negotiable. When Marissa protested, Ethan said quietly, "I owe you more than gratitude. I owe you change." Weeks later, in the mansion's garden, Elena's roses were blooming again. The air smelled sweet and clean. The sun warmed the stone patio, and the fountain murmured softly like a lullaby. Noah and Lucas sat on a blanket with Marissa, folding paper hearts. It had become their new ritual: fold, press, 3 taps, tap, 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 a private language that meant we made it through. Ethan watched from a chair nearby, finally letting himself breathe. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight and had learned how to set part of it down. Noah stood and walked to Ethan, holding a paper heart in one hand and his sketchbook in the other. He climbed onto Ethan's lap with quiet determination. Ethan's arms wrapped around him instantly, as if he had been waiting all his life for permission to hold on. Noah lifted his small palm and placed it gently over Ethan's chest. Ethan's breath caught. "What is it, buddy?" Noah's eyes held his, steady and deep. His voice was soft, but it landed like truth, finally spoken in the right room. "Dad," Noah said carefully, as if each word was a bridge, "I can hear your heart." Ethan's face crumpled. He pulled Noah close and pressed his cheek to Noah's hair, shaking. Lucas crawled into the embrace too, wrapping his arms around both of them, laughing and crying at the same time the way only Lucas could. Marissa watched, tears streaming freely now, and whispered a thank you to God that wasn't about winning. It was about surviving with love intact. I stood at the edge of the garden, listening to the fountain, breathing in the scent of roses, watching a family stitched back together by truth and courage. I had come to write about wealth. I left with a story about worth. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect. How many times have you or someone you love been dismissed with an easy label when you knew something deeper was wrong? And if you were in Ethan's place, or Marissa's, would you have the courage to keep asking, to keep insisting, to keep tapping 3 times until someone answered? Tell me in the comments, what would you do if the system tried to erase your child's truth? And who would you become in the fight? If you want more emotional stories, like this, subscribe, like and share so these stories reach the people who need them. Because sometimes the strongest heartbeat in the room is the one that refuses to stay quiet.